The Alpha King found her sleeping in the stable. A pregnant she-wolf refused to leave her side. The wolf growled first. That was what stopped Kaylin in the middle of the stable doorway, one hand still gripping the wooden frame, the lantern in his other hand swinging gently in the cold night air. He had done this walk 100 times. More than 100. Long after his guards changed shifts and the pack house went quiet, Kaylin would walk the outer edge of his territory alone, checking the fences, checking the tree line, checking the stable where the horses were kept. Not because he needed to, but because the silence of those hours was the only time his mind let him rest. But tonight the stable growled at him. He lifted the lantern higher and stepped inside slowly. The horses were calm in their stalls, heads low, breathing in that slow rhythm of deep animal sleep. Nothing had disturbed them. Whatever was in here with them had been here long enough that the animals had accepted it as part of the night. He moved past the first stall, then the second. The lantern threw long orange shapes across the walls and the hay-covered floor, and then it found her. She was tucked into the corner of the last stall, the one that had been empty for months since the old mare had died. She had made a kind of bed out of the hay, piling it thicker beneath her, pulling it around her sides. She was wearing a dark coat that was too thin for the season, torn at the collar, and her dark hair was spread out beneath her head like a rough pillow. She was sleeping so deeply that the lantern light did not move her at all. And pressed against her left side, enormous and warm and absolutely not moving, was a she-wolf. The wolf was heavily pregnant, her belly round and firm, her breathing slow and measured. Her coat was thick and a deep gray-brown, and her eyes, when they caught the lantern light, were a steady gold. She was not growling anymore. She had made her warning. Now she was watching him. Calm, decided. The kind of calm that comes not from peace, but from certainty. She had already made up her mind about what she would do if he took one more step, and she did not appear to be concerned about the outcome for herself. Kaylin did not take one more step. He crouched down slowly, bringing himself to eye level with the wolf. The lantern held to the side so the light was not in her face. He looked at her for a long moment. She looked back. Her ears were forward, reading him. Her body was pressed firmly against the sleeping girl, every inch of her a declaration. He had lived his whole life among wolves. He had led them for 12 years. He knew the difference between a wolf that was afraid and a wolf that had made a choice. This wolf had made a choice. He looked at the girl then, really looked. She was young, perhaps in her early 20s, perhaps younger. It was hard to tell in the lantern light, and harder still with the exhaustion carved so deeply into her face. There was a bruise along her jaw, old enough to have gone yellow at the edges. Her lips were cracked from cold and dehydration. Her hands were folded under her chin, and even in sleep her fingers were slightly curled, pulled inward, like someone bracing for impact even in dreams. She had cried at some point. The tracks were still there on her face, dried pale against her skin. One of her shoes was missing. The foot that was bare had a cloth wrapped around it, crude and uneven, tied off with a strip of what looked like the hem of her coat. Kaylin sat back on his heels and was quiet for a moment. Behind him, one of the horses exhaled heavily. Outside, the wind moved through the trees at the edge of the property. The girl did not stir. The wolf kept watching him with those gold eyes, patient and absolute. He stood. He turned and walked back through the stable to where his head guard, Rowan, was waiting near the gate. Rowan was a broad-shouldered man with a close-cut beard and the particular stillness of someone trained to wait without fidgeting. He raised an eyebrow when Kaylin appeared. Kaylin said, "There is a girl sleeping in the last stall. A pregnant she-wolf is with her." Rowan blinked. "A wild wolf?" "Yes." "Do you want me to—" "No," Kaylin said. "Nobody goes in there tonight. Nobody wakes her. Nobody moves the wolf." He paused. "Post someone outside the stable door, quietly. If anyone tries to go in, they answer to me." Rowan did not question it. That was one of the things Kaylin valued most about him. "Yes, sir." Kaylin walked back toward the main house. He stopped once, halfway across the yard, and looked back at the stable. The light from his lantern had not been enough to tell him everything about that girl, but it had been enough to tell him a few things. She had not stumbled in there by accident. She had chosen the farthest corner, the emptiest stall, the place least likely to be found quickly. She had pulled the hay around herself with care. She had been planning to be quiet and small and unnoticed. She had done all of that, and still the wolf had found her. He went inside. He did not sleep. By the time the sky began to turn, the pale gray of early morning, Kalen had been sitting at the long table in his study for 3 hours, a cup of tea going cold in front of him, a stack of papers he had not looked at. He was thinking about the bruise on her jaw. He was thinking about the way her hands curled even in sleep. He was thinking about the single missing shoe and the cloth tied around her bare foot, and the fact that whoever had tied it had done so without any help, by themselves, in the dark somewhere. When Rowan knocked on the study door just after sunrise, Kalen was already standing. "She's awake," Rowan said. Kalen reached the stable to find a small crowd already gathered at the door. 3 of his younger pack members, the stable boy, and the cook's daughter, all craning their necks and speaking to each other in low voices. He moved through them without a word, and they parted without being told to. Inside the stable, the girl was sitting upright in the hay. The wolf was still beside her, awake now, watching the open door with ears forward. The girl had pulled her knees to her chest, and she was very still, looking at the doorway with an expression that Kalen recognized in the way you recognize something you have never seen before, but somehow already know. It was the expression of someone who had been found, and was now calculating exactly how bad that was going to be. She looked at him. He looked at her. Then she said, quietly, "I will leave. I am sorry for the trouble." Her voice was steady. Not the steadiness of someone who was fine. The steadiness of someone who had learned to keep their voice steady, no matter what was happening inside them, because anything else cost too much. Kalen said, "You are not going anywhere yet. Are you hurt?" She hesitated for just a moment. That hesitation was its own kind of answer. "I am fine." "You are missing a shoe." She looked down at her wrapped foot, as if she had forgotten it. "I lost it crossing the river. 2 days ago." 2 days. She had been walking on that wrapped foot for 2 days. He turned to the stable boy, who was hovering in the entrance with wide eyes. "Go and get Elder Nora. Tell her to bring her bag." He looked back at the girl. "What is your name?" Another pause. Shorter this time. "Mara." "Mara," he repeated. "I am Kalen. You are on my land. The wolf. Is she yours?" For the first time, something shifted in Mara's expression. Not quite a smile. Something softer and stranger. She looked down at the wolf, who was watching Kalen with those gold eyes, still pressed against Mara's side. "I don't think that is how it works," Mara said. "She found me. I think maybe she decided I was hers." Kalen looked at the wolf. The wolf looked back at him. He had the distinct and unusual feeling of being assessed and tolerated at the same time. "Does she have a name?" "I call her Rue," Mara said. She didn't argue with it. He nodded slowly. Then he looked back at Mara, and he said, calmly and clearly, the thing he had already decided during those 3 hours sitting alone in his study. "You will stay until Nora has looked at your foot, and you have eaten something. After that we will talk." He paused. "Nobody here will hurt you." Mara looked at him for a long moment. Her expression did not change very much. But something in her eyes shifted, not relief exactly, because she did not look like someone who trusted relief quickly. Something more like a person who had been carrying something very heavy and had just been allowed to set it down for a moment without being sure yet if that was safe. She looked back down at Rue. Rue had dropped her chin onto Mara's knee and closed her eyes. Outside the stable, the wind was picking up, carrying the smell of rain from the north. The horses stirred in their stalls. Somewhere in the main house, someone was starting a fire. The ordinary sounds of an ordinary morning, carrying on around a girl who had crawled into a stranger's stable on a cold night with nothing but a missing shoe and a pregnant wolf who had decided she was worth protecting. Kalen walked back to the stable door and said, to no one in particular, but loudly enough for everyone nearby to hear, "Go about your morning. There is nothing here that needs an audience." The small crowd scattered. Rowan caught Kalen's eye and gave a small nod. Kalen stood in the stable doorway for one more moment. Through the wide planks of the back wall, the morning light was beginning to come in thin and pale, falling in strips across the hay, across the wolf's gray coat, across Mara's face as she sat quietly, with her hand resting on Rue's side. She was not looking at him anymore. She was looking at the wolf. Her expression was unguarded now, in a way it had not been when she knew he was watching. It was the face of someone who had found something, or been found by something, that they did not yet have a word for. Something that had arrived without explanation and stayed without being asked to, and changed everything quietly, in the way the most important things always did. Kaylin turned and walked back toward the house to wait for Elder Nora. He had the feeling, moving through the cool morning air, that he was going to be waiting on a great many things before this was over. He did not think, then, that he minded. The first thing Elder Nora said when she unwrapped Mara's foot was, "You walked on this for 2 days?" Mara said, "Yes." Nora did not say anything for a moment. She was a small woman with close-cropped silver hair and the hands of someone who had done careful work for 50 years. She turned Mara's foot slowly, examining the sole, the heel, the deep cut along the arch that had been wrapped with cloth that was not nearly clean enough. She pressed 2 fingers gently against the skin above the wound, and Mara went very still but did not pull away. 2 days, Nora said again, more quietly this time. She set Mara's foot gently on her own knee and began cleaning the wound with something from her bag. And the 2 days before that, and the 2 before that. It was not a question. Mara said nothing. Across the stall, Rue was watching Nora with the patient attention of someone who had decided to allow this, but was keeping her own counsel about it. They were in the small room off the main stable that was used for storing tack and feed, which was the compromise Kaylin had reached between bringing Mara into the main house immediately, which had felt like too much pressure on a person who had just spent the night hiding in a hay pile, and leaving her in the stable stall, which Nora had flatly refused. There was a chair, there was a low shelf that Mara sat on, her back against the wall. Rue had come in with her and had not been asked to leave, because asking her to leave had not seemed like a thing that was going to work. "How long have you been traveling?" Nora asked. Mara thought about it. 3 months? A little more. Nora reached into her bag without looking up. From where? A pause. East. A long way east. Nora nodded, as if she had expected exactly that answer. She pressed a clean cloth to the wound on Mara's foot and held it there, steady. "And the bruise on your jaw? How old is that?" "Old enough," Mara said. Nora looked up at her then, not with the expression of someone who was prying, but with the expression of someone who had heard enough half-answers in 50 years of this work to know exactly what they meant. She looked at Mara for a long moment. Then she looked down again and continued her work. "You have a scar on your collarbone," Nora said, her voice careful and even. "Just below the left side. May I look at it?" Mara's hand moved to her collar before she stopped herself. She looked at Nora. Something passed across her face, quick and complicated, gone almost before it arrived. Then she pulled the collar of her coat aside without a word. Nora leaned forward. She looked at the scar for a long time. It was old, perhaps a year or two, silvered over and smooth. It sat in the shape of something that was almost a symbol, almost a mark, almost something deliberate, the kind of mark that was not an accident and was not the result of any ordinary injury. Nora sat back. She let out a slow breath through her nose. She did not look at Mara's face right away. She busied herself with putting things back into her bag, giving Mara time, which was something Mara seemed to need a great deal of, and which very few people had apparently thought to give her. "Does Kaylin know?" Nora asked. "Know what?" Mara said. But her voice was flat in a way that said she knew exactly what. "What you are," Nora said gently. "Or rather, what was done to you." Mara was quiet for a long time. Outside the small window at the top of the wall, a bird landed and then flew off again. Rue shifted slightly and put her heavy head down on the floor, sighing. "He does not know anything about me," Mara said finally. "I came in from the cold. I slept in his stable. That is all." "That is not all," Nora said. She was not unkind. She was simply honest. "You are an Omega, and someone performed a severance ritual on you. I can see the mark of it. It is not something I mistake for anything else." She paused. "It was not done with your consent, was it?" The silence stretched. Then Mara said very quietly, "No." Nora finished closing her bag. Then she reached over and put her hand, very briefly, on the back of Mara's hand where it rested on her knee. She did not make a speech out of it. She did not say anything for a moment. Then she said, "I am going to go speak with Kaylin. You are going to stay here, and someone will bring you food, and you are going to eat all of it. Do you understand? Despite everything, something moved at the corner of Mara's mouth. Not quite a smile. Yes, she said. Rue made a low, soft sound. Not a growl, nothing sharp, just a sound, like agreement. Nora stood. She paused at the door. The wolf, she said. What do you make of her? Finding you the way she did. Mara looked at Rue. Rue opened one gold eye and then closed it again. I stopped trying to make sense of it, Mara said. She just came. She lay down next to me and she wouldn't leave. I kept thinking she would leave. She paused. She never did. Nora was quiet for a moment. Then she said, some things find the people they are supposed to find. And they know it, even when the people don't. She opened the door. Eat the food when it comes, Mara. She left. The door closed softly. Mara sat in the small room with the gray wolf and the morning light coming through the window above, and she pressed her back against the cool wall and tilted her head up and closed her eyes. She did not understand what was happening. She had come in from the cold, like she had said. She had found a quiet corner, and she had slept, and she had woken up to find herself surrounded by strangers in a place that could very easily decide she was a problem. But no one had shouted at her. No one had dragged her out by her arm. The man who led this place had crouched down to her eye level and spoken to her in a voice that was even and steady, and the first question he had asked was whether she was hurt. She did not know what to do with that. She had stopped knowing what to do with kindness, somewhere around the second month of walking, when the kindness had largely stopped. Rue moved. The wolf got up, all that heavy, careful weight, and crossed the small room and pressed herself gently against Mara's legs, her big head pushing softly into Mara's hands. Mara's eyes opened. She looked down. She wrapped both arms around the wolf's neck and pressed her face against the warm, rough fur and stayed there, quietly, for a long time. The food came 20 minutes later. A young woman with a round face and careful eyes left it at the door without pushing it open all the way, set the tray down on the floor just inside, and withdrew without making it strange. Bread, still warm, a bowl of thick soup, a cup of something hot and sweet. Mara ate all of it. Outside, in the long corridor between the stable and the main house, Elder Nora was standing with Kalen, her voice low and serious, telling him what she had found. Kalen listened without interrupting. When Nora finished, he was quiet for a moment. His jaw was set in a way that the people who knew him well would have recognized. Not anger, not exactly, but the particular stillness that came over him when something was wrong and he was deciding what he was going to do about it. A forced severance, he said. It was not a question. The mark is clear, Nora said. She is an Omega. Someone suppressed her wolf without her agreement. It is old enough, a year, perhaps 2. She has been carrying it alone for a long time. And she has been traveling for 3 months. At least. Kalen looked at the stable door. Through it, through the tack room wall, Mara was eating soup, and did not know he was standing here thinking about her. Is she in danger? He asked. From whoever did this? I do not know yet, Nora said. She has not told me much. She is very careful about what she says. She paused. She has had to be, I think. For a long time. Kalen turned away from the stable door. He had a pack to lead, and a council meeting in 2 hours, and a border report he had not yet read. He had a list of things that needed his attention that was longer than the day allowed. He said, "Let me know if her condition changes." And Nora, he stopped. Nora waited. "She stays," he said, "until she is well enough to make her own decision about what comes next. Not until the council is satisfied. Not until the protocol says she can. Until she is well." Nora studied him for a moment. Then she nodded once. "Yes," she said. "I will let you know." She walked away down the corridor. Kalen stood still for a moment, looking at nothing in particular. He thought about a girl walking on a cut foot for 2 days. He thought about a wolf that had found her on a road somewhere and had simply decided to stay. He thought about the way Mara had said, with that careful, steady voice, that she would leave, that she was sorry for the trouble, as if the first thing she owed any stranger was an apology for existing in a space that was hard enough to survive in. He turned and went to his council meeting. But for the rest of that day, through every conversation and report and decision, some part of his mind kept going back to the stable, kept going back to the corner stall and the hay and the lantern light and a wolf pressing her whole weight against a sleeping girl who had nothing left, refusing to move, refusing to leave, as if she had looked at this person the world had walked past and had seen something the rest of the world had missed. He did not know yet what that something was. He had a feeling he was going to find out. The problem began quietly, the way the worst problems always did. For the first 2 days after Mara arrived, the pack house simply observed. People went about their work. They caught glimpses of her moving quietly through the outer corridors, always near the stable, always with Rue walking beside her, in that slow, heavy way of a wolf, very close to the end of her pregnancy. People watched. They talked among themselves in low voices. They formed opinions. The opinions were not uniform. The stable workers were the first to warm to her because she helped without being asked. She showed up the morning after her first full night, with a proper roof over her head, and simply began doing things, filling water buckets, moving hay bales, sweeping the concrete floor of the narrow alley between the stalls. She did not look for approval. She did not explain herself. She just worked, quietly and steadily, and when the older stable hand, a quiet man named George, asked her about it, she said only that it seemed fair to help where she was staying. George had nodded and handed her a better broom. But outside the stable, the mood was different. On the third morning, Kalen was crossing the main yard when he found 2 of his council members, Edmund and Lyle, deep in conversation near the well. They stopped when he approached, which told him everything about what they had been saying. Edmund was the eldest of the council, a careful, precise man who had served 3 alphas before Kalen and who wore his seniority like armor. He said, "We were hoping to speak with you today." "Then speak," Kalen said. Edmund looked at Lyle, then back. The girl in the stable. "Mara?" "Yes." Edmund folded his hands together. "She is unknown to us. She arrived without announcement, without invitation, without any verification of her origin or her pack affiliation. The protocol in such situations is—" "I know the protocol," Kalen said. "I wrote it." Edmund did not flinch. "Then you know that an unclaimed Omega, found on Packland without consent or declaration, is to be assessed and either taken informally or escorted to neutral territory within 7 days." "I know." "The 7 days," Edmund said, "end the day after tomorrow." Kalen said nothing. Lyle stepped in, his tone softer than Edmund's, but no less firm. "It is not about the girl herself, Kalen. None of us wish her harm, but the protocol exists for good reasons. We cannot know who sent her or why she is here, and the others are watching how this is handled." "The others?" Kalen repeated. "The pack," Lyle said. "They look to you. If they see the rules bend for one person—" "The rules exist to protect people," Kalen said. "If I must remind this council of that, then we have larger problems." He looked at both of them steadily. "Give me until the end of the week. Nora is still with her. I want a full assessment before any decision is made." Edmund studied him. "And if the assessment supports removal?" Kalen said, "Then we will talk again." He walked away before the conversation could continue. He was not avoiding the question. He simply had not decided yet how he wanted to answer it, and he had learned long ago not to make declarations until he was certain of what he was declaring. But the problem with careful decisions is that the world does not always wait for them. On the 4th day, Mara was at the well in the outer yard at dusk, carrying 2 heavy buckets of water back toward the stable. The light was going, the air was cold, and she was moving quickly and quietly the way she always did. She did not hear the 2 men approach from behind the storage building until they were already there. Their names were Gareth and Pete. They were young, barely 20, both of them, and they were the kind of young that had not yet learned the difference between having an opinion and acting on it. They were not bad people, not exactly. They were people who had been listening to the wrong conversations and had started to feel brave in groups. Gareth said, "You know you shouldn't still be here." Mara stopped walking. She did not turn around immediately. She set the buckets down first, slowly and carefully, because they were heavy and she did not want to spill the water. Then she turned. She looked at Gareth, then at Pete. She looked at them the way someone looks at a situation they have been in before and have already cataloged, filed, and made their peace with. Her face was neutral. "I know there has been a lot of talk," she said. Her voice was even. "I am not going to argue with you about it. You should leave, Pete said. Before the council makes you. It would be better for everyone. Better for you, Mara said. Not sharp, not angry, just precise. Gareth took a step closer. You came here without permission. Nobody knows who you are or where you came from, and you have a wild wolf living in our stable. That is not normal. No, Mara agreed. It is not. So why are you still here? She looked at him for a moment. Then she said quietly, because the person who runs this place told me to stay until I was well, and I have not yet found a reason to disbelieve him. She picked up the water buckets. Now, if you will excuse me, those buckets are heavy. She turned and walked away. She did not hurry. She kept her pace steady and her back straight, and she did not let them see that her hands, wrapped around the bucket handles, were white at the knuckles. She had almost reached the stable door when she heard it. Not a sound from the men behind her. A sound from inside the stable. A low, resonant noise. Not quite a growl. Not quite a warning. The kind of sound that moved through the ground as much as the air. And then footsteps in the hay, slow and deliberate, and the large shape of Rue appeared in the stable doorway. She had not run. She was not running now. She walked out of the stable door with that enormous, careful weight of a wolf, days from giving birth, and she placed herself between Mara and the two men, and she sat down. She did not growl. She did not bare her teeth. She simply sat and looked at Gareth and Pete with those gold eyes, and breathed. The two men stared at her. Rue stared back. Gareth opened his mouth. Then he closed it. Then he and Pete looked at each other, and without another word, they left. Mara stood behind Rue and let out a long, slow breath. Then she crouched down beside the wolf and pressed her forehead against Rue's broad neck. Her eyes closed, her free hand on Rue's warm side. "Thank you," she whispered. Rue made that low, soft sound again. Not agreement exactly, just presence. They stayed like that for a long moment in the doorway of the stable, the cold evening air moving around them, the light almost gone from the sky. At the far edge of the outer yard, Rowan stood in the shadow of the storage building and watched. He had arrived in time to see Rue appear in the doorway and Gareth and Pete walk quickly away. He had seen Mara crouch down next to the wolf. He had seen the way Mara's shoulders moved, the particular, private movement of someone letting go of something they had been holding tightly for too long. He turned and went to find Kaelin. He found him in the study, standing at the window, already looking toward the outer yard, with an expression that said he had somehow already known. Rowan relayed what he had seen. He did not editorialize. He gave the facts, in order, cleanly. Kaelin listened. When Rowan finished, there was a silence. Then Kaelin said, "Talk to Gareth and Pete tomorrow." "Yes," Rowan said. "And the council?" "Edmund is expecting an answer." Kaelin turned away from the window. He picked up the border report from his desk and opened it and began reading, which was his way of indicating that a conversation was almost over. "The council will have its answer before the week is out," he said. "Tell Edmund to be patient." Rowan nodded. He went to the door. "Rowan," Kaelin said, without looking up from the report. "Yes? Make sure the outer yard is patrolled at dusk, going forward." A pause. Then, "Yes, sir." The door closed. Kaelin set the report down. He looked at the window again, though there was nothing to see in the dark outside now. Just his own reflection, looking back at him. He thought about a wolf sitting in a doorway, quiet and enormous, and utterly unimpressed, and two young men who had walked away without being chased. He thought about the way Mara had picked up the water buckets before she had turned around, because she did not want to spill the water, even then. Even then. He thought about what it meant to spend so long being careful about everyone else's comfort that it became your first reflex, even when someone was standing behind you being unkind. He thought about the council and the protocol and the 7 days, and he thought about what Lyle had said. The others are watching how this is handled, and he thought that Lyle was right. They were watching, and he was going to have to give them an answer. He had already decided what the answer was going to be. He had decided it the moment Nora had told him about the scar on Mara's collarbone and what it meant, and how she had carried it alone for over a year without asking anyone for anything. He had decided. He was simply taking his time, because in his experience, the people who had already made up their minds before they had heard everything were also the people who were most often wrong. But he had heard enough. He picked the report back up and finished reading it. He answered 3 notes that needed answering. He drank a cup of cold tea, and did not notice it was cold. And then he went to bed, and for the first time in 4 days, he slept without his mind going back to the stable every 20 minutes. He had already decided. There was nothing left to keep him awake. Rue went into labor just before midnight. Mara woke because Rue woke. There was no dramatic signal, no single moment of alarm. Just the shift in the wolf's breathing, the restless way she moved in the hay, the small sound she made that was lower and more inward than any sound she normally made. Mara had been a light sleeper for years. She was awake before her eyes were fully open. She sat up. She looked at Rue in the dim light from the single lamp she kept burning low at the edge of the stall. Rue was on her feet, turning slowly in a circle, her eyes half closed with concentration. Mara said softly, "I know. I hear you." She moved slowly. No sudden sounds, no sudden movements, keeping her voice and her body low and calm. She had no training in this. She had never done anything like this before. But she had 4 younger siblings, and she had been the one who was always there at 3 in the morning when someone needed something. And that had taught her one thing clearly. The most important thing, when someone is in pain and frightened, is to be a steady presence that does not add to the fear. She sent the stable boy, young Owen, 16 years old and still half asleep, to wake elder Nora. Then she stayed. Rue did not want to be touched at first. She circled and breathed and let Mara speak, but she moved away from hands. Mara let her. She sat cross-legged in the hay nearby and kept her voice going in that low, even stream. Nothing important, just words, just sound, just the reassurance of a voice that Rue knew. After perhaps 20 minutes, Rue came and pressed her flank against Mara's side and stayed there. That was where Nora found them when she arrived, quick and capable, her bag already open before she was fully through the stall gate. Nora looked at the two of them, wolf pressed against girl, girl's hand moving slow and careful on the wolf's side, and she said simply, "Good. Keep talking to her. Your voice is helping." Mara kept talking. She was not aware of the exact moment Kaylin arrived. She was too focused on Rue, on Nora, on the rhythm of the labor which was long and grinding, and asked a tremendous amount of a body that was already carrying so much. She heard the soft sound of boots in the hay somewhere behind her, near the stall gate, and she knew without turning that it was him. There was something about the quality of the quiet he brought with him that she had already learned to recognize. She did not turn. She kept her hands on Rue and her voice steady, and her attention on what was in front of her. The hours passed. Nora was extraordinary. She worked without drama, without raising her voice, without making the space feel crowded. She knew exactly when to step in, and when to give Rue room, and when to look at Mara with a small nod that meant, "Keep going, you are doing exactly right." The first pup was born just after 2 in the morning, a small, squirming, furious thing that made Rue exhale in a long, shuddering breath and drop her head for a moment before her instincts brought her head back up and around to tend to it. Mara pressed her forehead against Rue's neck and closed her eyes for a second, breathing. The second pup, the third. Then a pause, a long one. Mara felt it in Rue's breathing before Nora said anything. A change, a new kind of tension. Nora's hands moved carefully. Her face was still, which was the face of someone focusing very hard. The fourth pup came quietly. Mara knew immediately. She did not need to be told. There are certain silences that are different from other silences, and this was one of them. Nora held the small pup gently, and it was small, much smaller than the others, and very still. Mara said quietly, "Can I hold her?" Nora looked at her. Then she placed the pup carefully into Mara's hands. She was so light. Impossibly light, like something made of air and new, like something that had almost arrived and had not quite made the whole journey. Mara cradled her against her chest, her own warmth around the small body. She bent her head over her. She did not say anything out loud. She stayed like that for a long time. The stable was very quiet. The 3 surviving pups made small sounds in the hay where Rue was tending to them. Nora was quiet, giving the moment room. The wind moved outside the stable walls. Then Mara lifted her head, and she looked at Nora, and she said, she was loved. Even for a minute, that matters. She handed the small pup to Nora gently. Nora took her without a word. Behind Mara, near the gate where he had been standing without moving for 4 hours, Kaylin was very still. He had watched the whole of it. He had told himself he came because it was his land and his stable and his responsibility, and that was true as far as it went. But he had stayed, All 4 hours of it, because something had held him there that had nothing to do with responsibility. He had watched Mara's hands, how they moved, how steady they were, how gentle. He had watched her speak to a wolf in pain for hours with a patience that never flagged, never performed itself, never looked around for acknowledgement. He had watched her make space for something she could not fix, and be present inside that space without falling apart. And he had watched her hold a pup that was too small and too still, and he had seen her face in that moment. And it was a face that had known loss before, known it well enough to know that the worst part of it was not the grief itself, but the forgetting, the way time moved on, and the small things got lost. She was loved. Even for a minute, that matters. He left before she looked up. He walked out of the stable into the night air, which was cold and sharp and smelled of approaching rain, and he stood very still in the yard with his head slightly bowed. The pack house was dark and quiet around him. The stars were out. One of the horses made a soft sound from inside the stable, briefly, then was quiet again. He did not examine what was happening in his chest. He was not ready for that yet, but he stood there for a long time, and he let it be there, unnamed and certain, the way the most honest things sometimes are. Then he went inside. By morning, the story had moved through the pack the way important things always moved, not through announcement, not through any deliberate telling, but through the looks people exchanged across the breakfast table, through the particular way Owen the stable boy described what he had seen to the cook's daughter, who told her mother, who told 3 people at the morning water run. She stayed through the whole night. The wolf had 4 pups. 1 didn't make it, and the girl, she held it. She held it until she was ready to let go. People in the pack house processed this differently. Some of them were moved by it in ways they did not expect. Some of them set down their cups and looked out the window for a moment. Some of the older pack members, who had seen a great many things in their years, were quiet in a particular way that meant they were deciding something. Edmund heard the story mid-morning. He was silent for a long time after. Then he went to find Kaelin. He found him in the outer corridor, speaking with Rowan. He waited until Rowan had moved away. Then he said, without preamble, "I have been thinking about the protocol." Kaelin looked at him. "The protocol," Edmund said carefully, "was written to protect the pack from unknown threats, from people whose intentions are unclear, from those who might mean harm." He paused. "It was not written for every situation." Kaelin said nothing. He was very good at saying nothing, in a way that made other people fill the silence. Edmund cleared his throat. "I am not withdrawing the council's formal concern, but I am prepared to recommend that the assessment period be extended. Nora's report, when she gives it, will be the deciding factor." He paused again. "That is all I wanted to say." He walked away. Kaelin watched him go. Then he turned and went toward the stable. Inside, Rue was lying on her side in the clean hay that Owen had put down before sunrise, her 3 pups nursing in a warm row against her belly. She looked exhausted and complete, and deeply, profoundly satisfied, in the way that only creatures who have done something enormous and necessary can look. Mara was asleep sitting up against the stall wall, her knees bent, her head tipped back at an angle that was going to give her a pain in her neck when she woke. One hand was resting in the hay beside her, palm up, open, as if she had fallen asleep mid-reach. She looked very young. She looked very tired. She looked, for the first time since Kaelin had found her here, like someone who had stopped bracing for the next thing and was simply resting. He did not wake her. He stood at the stall gate for a while, watching the pups and the wolf and the quiet rise and fall of Mara's breathing. The morning light came in through the high gaps in the stable wall, pale and clean, falling across everything in long, thin lines. Then he took his coat off, folded it once, and reached over the gate and laid it over Mara's shoulders without touching her. She shifted slightly in her sleep. Her hand curled closed in the hay. He stepped back. He left the stable. He went to meet with the council and give them the answer he had been preparing for days, clear, formal, grounded in precedent and law, and unmistakable in its conclusion. Mara was not going anywhere. The morning Kaelin went to the council chamber, the sky outside was heavy with the kind of gray that sits very still before it decides what it wants to be. The air tasted of rain that had not yet fallen. The main yard was quiet, and the paths between the buildings were empty except for 2 younger pack members crossing between the kitchens, who moved quickly and did not look up. Kalen walked into the chamber first and remained standing. He did not sit at the head of the table where his chair was. He stood to the side of it, which was a choice, and the council members who were already seated noticed it and were quiet. Edmund was there. Lyle was there. 4 other council members, 2 men and 2 women, older and careful, and chosen because they were careful. They arranged themselves on both sides of the long table and looked at him. He said, "I have asked for this meeting because I owe you all a formal answer. You gave me time, and I do not take that lightly." Edmund folded his hands on the table. "We are listening." Kalen said, "I am invoking the Alpha's right of sanctuary for Mara. She is under my protection. She will remain here until she has fully recovered, and after that she will be free to decide for herself what she wants. If she chooses to stay, she stays under my word. If she chooses to go, she goes under my protection until she is safely beyond our borders." The chamber was very quiet. Lyle said carefully, "You understand what invoking sanctuary means. It puts your personal authority behind her." "I understand what it means," Kalen said. "I wrote the charter." Edmund said, "And if someone challenges her presence, they challenge you." "Yes. And if she does something that brings difficulty to the pack, then I bear the consequence," Kalen said. "That is what my word is worth. You all know what it is worth. That is why I am offering it." The council looked at each other. This was not a short or simple thing. Invoking sanctuary was not done often, and when it was done, it was a statement that carried weight long after the immediate situation had resolved. It was a public commitment that could not be quietly walked back. Edmund said, "You are certain." "I am certain," Kalen said. Another silence. Then Edmund looked around the table. Lyle gave a small nod. The others, one after another, gave the same small nod. Edmund said, "The council acknowledges the Alpha's invocation of sanctuary. The formal assessment period is closed. Mara of no declared pack is under the Alpha's protection and is recognized as a guest of this house." He paused. "Do you require anything further from us?" "No," Kalen said. "Thank you for your time." He left the chamber. He walked directly from it to the small room off the stable, where Nora had first treated Mara's foot, which was now Mara's room, a real room, small and plain, with a narrow bed and a window, and a hook on the back of the door for her coat. Nora had organized it 3 days ago, quietly and without making it a ceremony. He knocked. A pause, then, yes. He opened the door. Mara was sitting on the edge of the bed, her hands folded in her lap. She was wearing a dark sweater that was a little too big for her, borrowed from the pack stores, and her feet were in the thick socks Nora had insisted on, while the wound on her foot finished healing. Rue was not with her. The wolf was with her pups in the stable, which was appropriate and right, and also the first time in weeks that Mara had been in a room without her. She looked smaller without Rue beside her. Not weaker exactly, just more visible somehow, less buffered. She looked at him and waited. He said, "I want you to know what I decided this morning. I invoked sanctuary on your behalf. Formally, in front of the council. You are under my protection. No one can move against you here without answering to me." Mara looked at him for a long moment. Something moved across her face, complicated and quick. Then she said, "I did not ask you to do that." "No," he said, "you did not." "Then why?" He was quiet for a moment. He had been thinking about this answer for days, because he wanted to give her the honest one and not the easy one. He looked at her, at the careful, steady face, at the eyes that had learned to give away very little, at the hands folded in her lap the way her hands were always folded when she was sitting still, pulled slightly inward, old habit of a person who had learned to take up less space. He said, "Because what Nora told me about you was enough, because what I saw that night in the stable and the night Rue gave birth was enough, because there are things that are wrong in the world, and the only honest response is to do something about them when they come close enough to do something about." He paused. "And because Rue chose you on a road somewhere when you had nothing, and I have spent my whole life learning to trust what the old wild things know." It was not a small answer. He had not meant it to be. Mara looked at him for a long time. Then she looked down at her hands. She was quiet for long enough that the silence became a full thing, with weight and texture. Then she said, "What does it cost you? Being honest. Tell me what it costs you, not what it gives me." He considered that. It costs me the agreement of a council that prefers clean solutions. It costs me a certain kind of uncomplicated authority that was easier when everything was straightforward. And it means that if you make a decision I cannot support, it reflects on me. He held her gaze. I am telling you that so you know the weight of it, not to ask you to carry it. It is mine. I am simply being honest with you. She nodded slowly, her hands unfolded in her lap, and then folded again, differently. Nobody has told me the full weight of anything in a long time, she said. People tell you what they need you to know. They leave out the parts that are hard. She looked at him. You just told me the hard part first. I thought you deserved it, he said simply. She was quiet again. Then, thank you. For the sanctuary. For the honest answer, and, she stopped. And? The coat, she said. The morning after Rue had the pups, I woke up with it over me. I did not know if it was you. It was me, he said. She nodded. She looked at the window for a moment. Then she looked back at him, and she said, I do not know what I am going to do next. I do not know if this is a place I am supposed to stay, or a place I was supposed to pass through. I have been trying to figure that out since I got here, and I have not managed it yet. You do not have to figure it out yet, he said. That is easier to say than to feel. I know, he said, but it is still true. She held his gaze for a moment. Then she said, The severance, Nora told you about it. Yes. She told you it was done without my consent. Yes. She was quiet for a moment, and the quiet was a different kind now. Not guarded, just full, like someone turning something over carefully before they hand it to you. I had a pack, she said. I was young and I did not know enough, and someone with more authority than sense decided that I was a problem that needed to be solved quietly, and they solved me. She said it plainly, without drama, the way she said most things. And then I walked east and then west, and then nowhere in particular, and I kept thinking that at some point I would figure out the right direction to walk in, and I never did. You walked here, Kaylin said. Rue walked me here, Mara said. I was just following the wolf. He almost smiled. That is usually the right approach. Something shifted at the corner of her mouth. Not quite a smile, but close. Your pack is afraid of me, she said. Some of them, he agreed. Some of them are curious. Some of them are watching to see what I do. And some of them, he stopped, thinking of the stable boy Owen who had brought Mara extra blankets without being asked, and the cook who had quietly doubled the portion that went to the tack room, and George the stable hand who had handed her a better broom as if it were the most natural thing in the world. Some of them have already decided. Decided what? That you are worth the trouble, he said, and that Rue's choice was not an accident. Mara looked at him steadily. Then she looked away, at the narrow window where the pale gray morning was still undecided about whether to be clear or cloudy. She said, I need the severance reversed. Nora mentioned there is someone who could do it. That is the thing I want more than anything. Not protection or a place to stay. I want myself back. Then we will find a way to do that, he said. Nora has already sent a letter. Mara turned to look at him quickly. Something moved across her face. Surprise, unguarded and quick, before she caught it. She already sent the letter? 3 days ago, Kaylin said. Before I invoked sanctuary. She wanted to know it was possible first. Mara looked at him for a long moment. Then she said, very quietly, she did not tell me that. She thought it might be better for you to hear it when there was something concrete to say. Another silence. Longer this time. Then Mara said, I stopped believing that things could be put right. At some point on the road, I stopped believing it. She paused. I did not tell Rue. She seemed to believe it for both of us. He looked at her. He said, she was right to. Outside the window, the gray morning finally decided. The rain came. Not dramatically, just steadily. The ordinary good rain of late autumn that soaks into everything slowly and thoroughly, and means that something will grow better in the spring. Mara got up from the bed. She moved to the window and looked out at the rain falling on the yard, the stable roof, the wide flat stones of the path between the buildings. Her hands were at her sides, not folded, not pulled in, just resting. He stood at the door and did not interrupt the moment. She was not someone who needed to be interrupted. She was someone who needed to be given room, and he was learning that about her more precisely every day. After a while, she turned and said, I would like to go and see Rue and the pups. Of course, he said, and stepped back from the door. She walked past him and down the corridor and out into the rain without a coat, and she did not appear to mind the rain at all. He watched her cross the yard, unhurried, and push open the stable door and disappear inside. He stood in the doorway of the small room for a moment. The rain fell steadily. The pack house was coming to life around him. Voices in the kitchen, the sound of the morning routines beginning, the ordinary business of a community getting through another day. He thought about everything that was still unresolved, still unclear, still requiring time and patience and careful decisions. The specialist Nora had written to, and whether the reversal was possible, and how long it would take, and what it would mean for Mara when her wolf was restored to her after more than a year of suppression. The council, who were satisfied for now but would be watching. The pack, who were still deciding what they thought. He thought about all of it, and then he stepped back and let the corridor door close behind him, and he went about his morning. There were things that only time could answer. He had spent 12 years learning to respect the things only time could answer, and to work carefully in the meantime, and to trust that the careful work would matter when the time arrived. He thought about a girl walking into a stable in the dark. He thought about a wolf pressing her weight against someone who had nothing and had stopped asking for anything. He thought about a small, quiet room where a young woman had looked at him and asked, not for the good news first, but for the honest news, the hard part, the weight of it, because she had been told so many half-truths for so long that a whole truth, even a difficult one, was the thing that felt most like dignity. He thought about that, and he walked through the morning, and somewhere at the back of his mind, behind all the day's work and the decisions that needed making, and the reports that needed reading, something sat quietly and was certain. Not everything had a name yet. Some things arrived before their names did. He could wait. He was good at that. The specialist's name was Clara Venn. She arrived 12 days after Nora's letter, traveling on her own, a small woman of perhaps 60, with sharp gray eyes and a leather bag that looked older than most buildings Mara had ever slept in. She arrived at the gate in the early afternoon without any announcement and simply said, when Rowan came out to meet her, that she had received a letter from Nora and had come to see the girl. Mara met her in the stable, because that was where Mara spent most of her time now, and Clara Venn walked in without ceremony and looked at the three pups tumbling over each other in the hay and said, "Healthy, good." She looked at Rue, who looked back. Then she looked at Mara. She said, "Show me the scar." Mara pulled the collar of her sweater to the side. Clara Venn leaned forward, her eyes narrowed. She did not touch it yet. She looked at it from 3 different angles, tilting her head each time. Then she straightened up. "How long ago?" she asked. "About 2 years," Mara said. "And how much of yourself do you still feel? Your wolf. Is she completely silent, or is there something?" Occasionally. Mara considered this. She had not been asked that question in 2 years, and the honest answer required her to go somewhere she had spent most of 2 years not going. "Sometimes," she said carefully, "when I am very still, or when I am frightened, there is something distant, like hearing a voice from another room." Clara Venn nodded, as if this were a good sign. "The suppression was done crudely," she said. "The mark is clear, but the technique was not refined. This is not a compliment to the person who did it. It means they caused more damage than they needed to, but it also means the seal is not clean, and that is better for us." Mara said, "Can you reverse it?" "Yes," Clara Venn said simply. "It will take 3 sessions, spread over a week. It will not be painless, not because I choose to make it painful, but because there is no gentle way to open something that was closed by force." She looked at Mara steadily. "It may bring things up that you have not felt in a long time, feelings you have been separated from. You may feel grief about the time that was lost. Your wolf, when she comes back, may be disoriented, and that may be disorienting for you." Mara held her gaze. "I understand. Do you have support here?" Mara looked at Rue, who was watching Clara Venn with those steady gold eyes. Then she looked toward the stable door, and beyond it, the yard and the pack house and all the people in it who had been arriving, slowly and imperfectly, and in their various ways, at the decision that she was worth their time. "Yes," Mara said, "I have support." Clara Venn nodded. "Then we begin tomorrow morning." The first session was hard. Mara did not talk about it afterward, and no one asked her to. She came out of it and went straight to Rue and sat with her for an hour in silence, her forehead on the wolf's neck, her eyes closed. Nora left water and food nearby and did not hover. Kaylin came to check on her that evening, quietly, the way he did things. He knocked on her door. When she answered, he stood in the doorway and said, "How are you?" She thought about it. She said, "Like something is waking up that has been asleep for a long time and is not happy about being woken." He said, "Is that good or bad?" She said, "I think it is just true." He nodded. He did not press further. He said, "There is food in the kitchen if you want it." He started to go. "Kaylin," she said. He turned back. She looked at him. She did not say anything for a moment. Then, "You have been very patient. You are worth being patient with," he said. It was a simple statement, not an elaborate one. He said it the way he said most things, plainly, without decoration, as if it were just a fact. She looked at him for a moment. Something in her face had been changing, by degrees, over the past weeks. Or rather, something had been returning to it. A quality that had been absent. Not happiness exactly, not yet, but the ground that happiness grows from. The quality of someone who was starting to believe, cautiously and one small piece at a time, that the current situation might actually be what it appeared to be. She said, "Good night, Kaylin." He said, "Good night, Mara," and went. The second session was harder than the first, and the third was harder than the second. On the morning of the third session, Mara woke before dawn and sat on the edge of her bed in the dark room and was afraid, in a way she had not let herself be afraid for a long time. She sat with it, because she had learned that sitting with things was sometimes the only honest way to get through them. Then she got up and went to the stable and sat with Rue and the pups until the light came, and then she went to meet Clara Venn. Clara Venn worked quietly, her hands steady, her instructions brief and clear. Mara followed them. She kept her breathing even. She focused on the sound of the wind outside the window, and Rue's breathing from the corner where the wolf lay watching, and the distant sounds of the pack house beginning its day. And then, somewhere in the middle of the third hour, something shifted. It was not dramatic. There was no great moment of light or sound or clarity. It was simply a return, like a sound that had been just below hearing, suddenly becoming audible, like a room you had forgotten existed opening its door. Mara sat very still. Her eyes were closed. Her hands were flat on her knees, palms down. Clara Venn said, very quietly, "There she is." Mara said nothing. She was listening to something inside herself that she had not heard in 2 years, something that had been there all along, waiting on the other side of a door that someone else had locked. It did not announce itself. It did not explain itself. It simply came back, the way it had always been, and it pressed up against her from the inside, and she let it come. She felt the tears before she understood them. They came without permission and without warning, and she did not try to stop them. Clara Venn put a hand on her arm briefly, firm and warm, and then removed it. Because Mara did not need to be held right now. She needed room. A few minutes later, Rue got up from the corner and walked over and sat beside Mara and leaned against her, and Mara wrapped one arm around the wolf's neck and let the last of it go. She stayed there for a long time. When she finally opened her eyes, the room was full of afternoon light. Clara Venn was sitting across from her, patient and quiet, her hands folded. Mara said, "It worked." "Yes," Clara Venn said. Mara breathed in, breathed out. She was aware of herself differently than she had been for 2 years. Not only her body, not only her thoughts, but all of it. The whole layered thing of herself. Present and accounted for. "What do I owe you?" Mara asked. Clara Venn looked at her steadily. "Nothing. Nora asked me to come. I came because it was the right thing to do." She paused. "What was done to you was wrong. Reversing it is not a favor. It is a correction." She packed her bag and left before dinner, the same way she had arrived, without ceremony, without fanfare, simply moving through the world and doing the work that needed doing. Mara sat in the tack room for a while after she left. The pups were making noise from the stall next door, the small, loud noise of creatures who were growing fast and had no interest in being quiet about it. Rue had gone back to them. Through the window, the late afternoon light fell across the floor in a long gold shape that moved slowly, as the sun shifted. Mara was whole. She had not been whole in 2 years, and she was still learning the shape of it, the way you learn the shape of a room you have stepped back into after a long time away. She heard footsteps in the corridor. She knew them by now. There was no one in this pack house whose footsteps she did not know, and these were the ones she had been listening for without meaning to, for weeks now. Kaylin appeared in the doorway. He looked at her. She looked at him. There was a beat of quiet between them, and in that beat, he saw what Clara Venn had done, because it was visible in her face, in a way that was impossible to miss if you had been paying attention, and he had been paying attention. He said, "It worked." She said, "Yes." He let out a slow breath. Not relief exactly, something deeper than relief, something that had been tightly wound for longer than he had known Mara, and was now releasing slowly. She stood up. She crossed the small room, and she stopped in front of him, closer than she usually stood, and she looked at him directly, with those eyes that had spent weeks carefully giving away very little, and were now giving away more than she probably intended. She said, "I want to stay." He said, "You can stay. I mean..." She stopped. She started again, because she was someone who was careful about saying what she meant, and wanted to get it right. "I have been trying to decide, since I got here, whether I was somewhere I was supposed to stay, or somewhere I was just passing through. And I have been afraid to decide, because the last time I decided somewhere was home, that decision was made for me." She paused. "But I am deciding now. I want to stay, not because I have nowhere else to go, because I want to be here." He held her gaze for a long moment. He said, "Then stay." She nodded. Something settled in her face, the way something settles when a decision that has been pending for a long time is finally made, and the weight of the pending is gone, leaving only the decision and the road ahead of it. She said, "Your pack is still watching how this goes." "Yes," he said. "And they are watching someone who stayed with a wolf through a long night and held what could not be saved and did not look away from any of it. They are watching someone who helped with the water buckets and swept the stable floor and asked for nothing. And they are deciding, the way people decide things, slowly and in their own time, one day after another." He paused. "Most of them have already decided." She said, "And the ones who haven't?" He said, "They will." Outside in the stable, the pups made noise. One of them, the largest and most determined, had apparently decided to attempt an escape from the stall, and was making its views on the matter known at considerable volume. Rue made the sound she made when she was gently correcting them, low and resonant, and infinitely patient. Mara's mouth curved. That was the almost smile, the real one, the one that had been appearing more often over the past week, and Kaylin had learned to notice it the same way he had learned to notice everything else about her, carefully, without making a production of it. He said, "There is a pack dinner tonight. You do not have to come, but you are invited, formally, as a member of this house." She looked at him. She said, "Will it be strange for people?" "Probably," he said honestly. "For about 10 minutes. Then someone will say something funny, and it will be something else." She looked toward the stable, toward Rue and the pups and the hay and the familiar smell of it. Then she looked back at him. She said, "I will come." He nodded. He went to the door, and then he stopped, the way he sometimes stopped, as if there was one more thing that was true and was better said than left unsaid. He said, "Rue found you on a road when you had nothing. You stayed by her through the worst night. You asked for nothing and you gave everything you had, which was not very much, but was offered completely." He paused. "I do not think she chose wrong." Mara was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Neither do I." The pack dinner that evening was loud and ordinary, and exactly what a pack dinner always was. Too many people in a warm room. The kind of noise that means safety. The particular comfortable chaos of people who have spent enough time together to know each other's habits and to tolerate each other's particular varieties of difficult. Mara sat at the long table near the middle, not hidden in a corner, not at the head, just in the middle, where the food was passed most easily. George the stable hand sat on one side of her and told her a long story about a horse he had known 20 years ago that she was almost certain was not true, but was very entertaining. On her other side, Owen the stable boy asked her 3 careful questions about Rue's pups, and she answered each one seriously, because he was asking seriously, and she respected that. Across the table, Edmund watched her for a while. He did not say anything, but at some point during the meal, he reached for the bread and passed the basket down in her direction, which was such a small thing that most people would not notice it. Mara noticed it. She was someone who had spent a long time paying attention to small things, because small things had often been the only honest signal about what was actually happening. She took a piece of bread and passed the basket along. At the head of the table, Kalen talked to Lyle about the border report and drank his tea, and occasionally said something that made the people nearest him laugh. He did not look at Mara often. When he did, it was briefly, and if she caught it, he did not look away, and she did not look away, and then the conversation moved on. After the dinner, when most people had drifted away to their evening routines and the tables were being cleared, Mara went back to the stable one more time. Rue was awake, feeding the pups, and she looked up when Mara came in, with those gold eyes that had seen something in Mara, on a road somewhere, that Mara still did not fully understand. She crouched down next to the wolf and put her hand on Rue's side, feeling the warm, steady breath in and out. "I am staying," she told her. "I decided." Rue blinked slowly. The pups nursed, oblivious and content. "You knew," Mara said. "It was not quite a question. Didn't you? You knew where we were going." Rue made the low, soft sound. The one that was not quite agreement and not quite anything else, but which Mara had learned to trust completely. She stayed in the stable a while longer. The night was quiet around the pack house. Somewhere a door closed. Somewhere someone was laughing at something. The ordinary, ongoing music of people living their lives inside a shared space. Mara had not heard that music for a long time. Not aimed at her, not inclusive of her, not something she was allowed to be inside rather than passing by. She listened to it now. She let it be real. After a while, she stood and said goodnight to Rue and the pups, and she walked back across the yard in the cool night air, and she went inside. She went to her small room with the narrow bed and the window, and the hook on the back of the door. She took off her coat and hung it on the hook. She sat on the edge of the bed. She thought about a road, at night, in the cold, and a wolf lying down beside her without explanation, and refusing to leave, and refusing to leave, and refusing to leave. She thought about all the doors that had been closed before this one. She thought about the scar on her collarbone that was still there and would always be there. The mark of something that had been done to her without her consent, which was the kind of thing that did not disappear just because it had been corrected. She thought about the fact that it had been corrected, that someone had written a letter before they were even asked to, that someone had crouched down to her eye level in a lantern-lit stable and asked first whether she was hurt. She thought about all of it, and then she lay down, and she pulled the blanket over herself, the thick, warm blanket that had appeared on her bed a week ago, without any explanation from anyone, and she closed her eyes. For the first time in more than 2 years, she fell asleep in a place that felt like it might become a home. Outside her window, the night was clear. Somewhere in the stable, the 3 pups were dreaming whatever small, loud dreams new creatures dream. Rue was watching over them in the dark, patient and golden-eyed and absolutely certain, the way she had always been. And somewhere in the quiet of the pack house, things that had not yet been named were beginning, slowly and without announcement, to take their shape. Some things declare themselves quietly, over time, in the accumulation of small moments. A coat laid over sleeping shoulders, a basket of bread passed without ceremony, a door that stays open, and a wolf on a road, who looked at someone the world had walked past and saw, with the clarity of something older and wiser than explanation, that this person was worth staying for. The wolf had not been wrong. She never had been.